Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another My Motion Graphics tutorial. My name is Gustavo Maia and today I'm going to show you how to use My Studio. My Studio is a really cool add-on to your Cinema 4D and it will help you to create stunning renders. And it's really easy to use. But first of all, we need to install it. So head to mymotiongraphics.tv, look for My Studio, download it, and then you'll need to go into your Maxon folder, your current Cinema 4D version. I'm using R19. Go into Library, Browser, and drag and drop your lib40 file into the browser folder. Then all you need to do is restart your Cinema 4D and you're ready to go. So let's stop with the chit chat and let's get started.
My Motion Graphics.
So here we are in Cinema 4D. I'm using R19 and let's bring My Studio into our scene. Let's go into Content Browser, head into Presets, look for My Studio folder, and then drag and drop this lovely icon into our scene. Then go back into Objects Manager and now we're ready to go. So we have a bunch of options over here. Let's just focus on the background for a minute. And the background is, well, the background is what you see right now. It's kind of this curved background. It has a floor, like a kind of a back wall. And it might be used to see this in photography studios or stuff like that. So let's get going. I can enable or disable the background. I have a slot to drag a material into, or I can simply use the default material, which is right here. And I can manipulate that material over here, or I can simply edit the same material over here by clicking on this little triangle and then just go into the material and edit it. Great, so next we can change the width, we can change the height, and you'll see some funkiness going on over here. And that's part of the deal. It will make sense later on, hopefully. We can change the depth, same thing over here. And we can also change the rounding. And the rounding is basically this curvature of this background that you can tweak up and down to get a curved surface or a totally flat surface if you want to go to extremes. Then we have start and end. And so start will define where the shape will start, and the end will define where the shape will end. So if I set both to extremes, I can get a closed studio and then manipulate it like so. Cool thing is that if I increase the height, the object will stay on the floor, or basically where it stands. It won't be scaled on both sides of the axis, so that's nice. Great. So next we have flip, and what it does is basically, well, it flips the object around. And we have subdivision. Let me just bring here some lines over here. And subdivision will increase or decrease the geometry or the subdivision levels, whatever that your background has. So I'm going to leave this at 80. And in fact, I'm going to open a new file that I have already set up over here. And quick tour on the file. Really simple. We have a scene with a camera. And let me just bring this like so. So this camera is hidden, but it is right here. It's a huge camera because our coffee cup is very small. Well, this is a coffee cup that I've brought into our scene. It was on the presets folder, on the content browser, somewhere in the broadcast folder. There's some 3D objects over here, and we have dinnerware. And I brought this object over our scene. All I changed was the material. I added a little bit more reflection so I could show you some stuff on this tutorial. So I'm gonna hide this camera. I have a light here. And obviously I have our object. So I'm going to close this I'm gonna go into content browser, back into presets, and look for my studios. So drag and drop this over here, and there you go. Now, my studio is huge because our coffee cup is very small. So to fix this, I'm gonna just scale this guy down, way down, like so. And quick tip, if you want to select my studio, do it over here. Always select your studio over here. Great. So now I'm going to see what our camera is looking at and adjust the shape of our background in order to look cool. So just tweaking here and there, nothing fancy. Maybe adjust some rounding, adjust the end a little bit. I might bring it over so, and a little bit larger. All right, this looks pretty good. Cool. So let's. Oh yeah, before we render anything, let's just go into our render settings and check some stuff. So I have a square output, a small square output, just to make renders a little bit quicker. And we can go into the anti-aliasing and increase that to best so that we can have better render quality. Let's go into options and reduce this reflection depth to 3. This won't make much of a difference in our overall look, but it will make our renders faster. All right, now let's close this and let's take a quick look at our render and see what we've got. Cool, so there you go. Simple scene, nothing fancy. There's a little bit of darkness over here. I'm gonna change that right now. So scene light, and then just move the light further away. And hopefully now we don't have that dark corner over there. Not that's wrong, it's okay, but it just looks better like this. Right. So remember, we only have one light source in our scene. So let's go into my studio and bring this up. Go into the room tab and enable the room. Now what happens is that this box appears right around our background. And if you change the size of the background, the box will follow. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, but then what? Let's make another render and see if we can see any difference. So this was our previous render, and this is the next one. You might see some differences on the reflections here and there, very subtle differences, and that is because we now have a room that reflects itself onto the reflective objects. But there's more. So if I want, I can come into the room tab and I can do some other stuff like scene by reflection. I can check or uncheck. I can switch that to off, and then our room will not be visible by the reflections, but we want this on. I can show or hide the guides, and I can show the walls, which will show us the walls basically. And then I can also enable X-ray, which will allow me to see through the room into our scene. I'm gonna switch this off and I'm gonna leave this on for a minute, and then I can change the colors of each wall and the intensity of that same color. So let's say I want to change the right wall color to maybe blue and the left wall to maybe orange. I can do that like so, and then I can decrease the intensity of the left wall, so I have 100%, and if I bring that down, the wall gets darker and darker. Now this is useful on our scene right now, just for the reflections. So let me just hide the walls and make a quick render, and hopefully there will be some kind of blue over here and some kind of very slight orange over here. If we had a sphere, we could probably see it better. But well, in fact, let's create a sphere real quick, just to show you a little bit better what I'm talking about. So bring the sphere over here and drop the same material into the sphere and hide our coffee cup, just so you can see it a little bit better. So yeah, the orange is over there, a little bit hidden by the actual light reflection, and there's our blue. So things are working as they are supposed to. Great. So let's hide this sphere. I'm gonna leave it here. Might be useful later on. Great. So then what? If we go into my studio and go into our room and disable the room, and if we go into our render settings and add global illumination and make a quick render, everything will look better. And hopefully you know what global illumination is. Basically, in a few words, it's just some calculations that are going on that will reflect the light into surfaces and eventually brighten up our scene in a more natural way. And darker areas will get brightened by this effect. So this was before and then after. Okay, so let's go into our room and bring those colors back to white. We'll play with those a little bit later on. And yeah, so this is what we have. So we can get our global illumination a little bit stronger by adding a secondary method. So I'm gonna go for irradiance cache and make a quick render once again. So now what's happening is that the light is being reflected or bounced by surfaces some more times. So it will lighten up a little bit the darker areas and give us a more realistic result. Let's bring that to 3, and hopefully by now you haven't seen anything that awesome, but that's quite okay. We're gonna get there in a second. So with 3 bounces, the changes are very subtle. I can actually go and add another bounce over here, and it will eventually take longer to render. The higher the value you put here, the longer it will take to render. Actually, it didn't make that much of a difference, but it didn't much difference on our scene. The light is pretty much the same, just a slight change over here. So now if we enable our room in my studio, so select my studio, go into room and enable it. Now we have a room, and once we render this, watch what happens. Hopefully we will get a much brighter scene. Remember, we only have one light source. So what we did, this was before and this is our last render. With the room turned on, you can see the difference from one to another. So, you know, much brighter. So what the room's doing right now is basically creating geometry around the studio to reflect light. And if we didn't have our room enabled, the light would eventually get lost somewhere because it doesn't have any geometry to reflect onto. So cool thing about this is that we can select our light and bring it outside the room and make a quick render, and the light will still be able to hit our object, so our room won't cast any shadows. So the light will still be able to get into the room and do its thing over there. So that's pretty cool. Next, let's go and have some fun. There's more. So I can show the guides, hide the guides, show the walls. Yeah, I've shown you this before. Yeah, and change the colors. Great. Change intensity. Yeah, but there's more. Now let's show the walls and bring our camera over here. I can change the color of the walls as I've mentioned before. Let's do it real quick. So let's go into our orange and blue scheme again. And because now we have global illumination turned on, let's hide the walls and make a quick render. This will also affect the way light is reflected by colored surfaces. So basically, it will give some color to our renders, which is pretty cool. So this was before there, and let me just, yeah, and this, and yeah, so this was before the colored walls, and this is with the colored walls. So pretty nice. Remember, we only have one light source, and we can have more, obviously, but let's just close this for a minute and go into the next feature, which is dark corners. Now, dark corners, let's show the walls over here. Dark corners will darken the colors of the walls. So if I bring these values all the way up to 100%, you'll see what we get. We get some dark corners. And if I make another render, it will slightly change the overall effect because we now have darker walls, and so we'll get kind of toned down render. So this is before and this is after. It will also affect the reflection because we now don't have flat colors. We have this kind of gradients going on, and this will be seen in the reflection. There's more. So we can change the gradients over here of each individual wall. So let's say if I want these dark corners over here to be a lot darker or a lot more accentuated, I can change that. I can create whatever gradients I want and get different results. I also can edit the inner brightness of each wall, which is more or less the opposite of the dark corners. So if I open this, I can go into the left, for example, and I can increase the inner brightness of the left wall. And yeah, well, that probably would be too much, but you get the point. I can also edit the gradients for each inner brightness. So let's bring this up to the top, and we added inner brightness to our left wall. So in the left gradient, we can adjust that same gradient and make our custom gradients over here. So this will affect our look in the end. It will affect the reflections. It will also affect how light is reflected by those walls. Great. Now we have set walls on fire. Let's make a quick render before that. Let me just hide the walls and let's make a quick render and see what we have. Hopefully this will be quick. Okay, so this is what we have, and if I enable set walls on file, and I'm gonna enable this for all the walls, and I hit render once more, let's see what happens. Great, so our render is done. It took longer, yes it did, but we have this. Let's just compare it with our previous render, like so. So this was before and this is after. Remember, we only have one light source. So what's happening here? Basically, when you set the walls on fire, every single wall will turn into a light source and will also emit light. Not only reflect the light it's been cast by our area light, but will also work as a light source. So it's like if we had walls that you could simply turn on and would generate light. We don't need to set all the walls on fire. This will increase render times, and we can also have fun with colors. So now I'm choosing random colors just randomly choosing colors. And I might turn off the bottom and maybe turn off the back wall. And the back, I'm going to set it to white, and we'll add some green. So let's go into our front wall and add some green just to have some different colors. And by the way, you can see the look of your walls, of each individual wall over here on these materials, and that's kind of helpful. And this is all inside of this layer, so if you don't want to see those, you can simply go into no layer and you won't see all the materials that my studio creates. So let's make another render once again. And before we do that, because we now have walls on fire, we can go into our render settings and bring this down a bit. I would try 2 for a start. And I'm doing this because we now have a lot more light going on, and we probably don't need that much bouncing going on, and our renders will take less time. Like so. Now we have a 17 seconds render compared to the 51 with the 4 bounces. That's like a lot. And this is what we have. Now it's just a matter of playing with colors and light intensity, and we're gonna get a bunch of different results. And playing with intensity and gradients, let's just do one more. So I don't know, let's bring our view over here outside the room, show the walls and see what we've got. So sometimes it takes a little bit to refresh the colors of the walls. So when you activate it, it may do some awkward things with the colors, but it's just refreshing. So just give it a second. So no worries. Let's play a little bit with this. Let's change some colors. So I'm gonna go for this and maybe that, just doing some random colors. And on the left, let's bring some this green maybe, and the front I might bring this to white. And let's set our dark corners maybe randomly. I'm gonna randomize everything pretty much, maybe like so. On the front, I'm gonna set it to 100. And on our front gradient, let's do it like so. And the dark corners, I tone this down a little bit. I don't know, just give it a little bit more bright in the front. Let's edit our right wall and increase the inner brightness on our right wall. And on the left wall, I'm gonna do the same thing. I might do the same thing on the top. It won't do much if you have a plain white wall and you increase the inner brightness. It won't do that much. It will just add white to something that's already white. So let's make another render and see what we've got. By the way, now we see, let me just bring this. We see everything white because our camera is facing the wall. So we can hide the walls, and it won't make any difference in the render, but it will help us to see our scene. Basically, we'll show or hide the walls. And yeah, now this is our last example render. And that's pretty much it. There's another thing actually, real quick. So we have a compositing tab for our background and for our room. And you might be familiar with these options over here. And these options over here are pretty much the same. We have one exception. Seen by reflection is not here. It is over here. So just because it makes more sense while we work to have this option closer to us. And everything else that you might be familiar with is over here. If by any chance you want to access some more advanced compositing options on the compositing features, you can open up My Studio and you'll have compositing tag for each individual object, so background and room. You have a tag for each of those. So if you want to go and just adjust some GI parameters for each individual background or room object, you can use those. And I think that's pretty much it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to hit that like button, share, subscribe, keep those comments flowing and all that good stuff. My name is Gustavo Maia for mymotiongraphics.tv. I'll see you in another video. Until then, bye bye.